Hello and welcome to another IFSCC webinar. This is the sixth webinar in our series. I hope you've been enjoying these webinars. Each one has had more people attend, so they seem to be getting more popular, or the topics have been interesting. With me today is Mary Lynn Hallen. She is going to start the presentation and give you a little talk about the IFSCC. She'll throw it back over to me for the main presentation. So, without further ado, let's get started. Incidentally, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat room there, and we'll get started. All right, Marilyn, why don't you get started there?
So I just asked to do a brief intro to the IFSCC. What does IFSCC mean? It stands for the International Federation of Societies of Cosmetic Chemists. We're global. We're 49 national societies covering 79 countries, and we're growing. We've got at least one or two societies that we hope to announce in the next year or so. So we are growing. We're dedicated to international cooperation in science, cosmetic science, and technology. I wanted to let you know about our Cosmetic Science Database. If you belong to any of our 49 member societies, you're automatically a member of the IFSCC, an individual member. I think our Cosmetic Science Database is invaluable. It has almost 100,000 entries, and they're mostly posters, full papers, and articles excerpted from journals and magazines. It also has all of our IFSCC magazine articles since 2000, so 20 years worth of articles, and all papers and posters presented at our congresses or conferences since 1995. This is the only website you can get either of those. And again, every month we add more and more papers, articles, and posters from events around the world and publications around the world. It's free. You just go to cosmet.com to register. A brief overview. If you belong to any of the 49 societies that are member societies of our federation, you get the following individual member benefits. Quarterly, you'll get the IFSCC magazine. That usually has 4 to 6 articles. It's peer reviewed, only international cosmetic science publication out there. And everyone has the opportunity to submit papers for publication. We've talked about COSMET, our unique cosmetic science database. On our website, which is ifscc.org, we have a virtual library where you'll find webinars and videos. So today's webinar is being recorded. By tomorrow, you'll be able to play it back from our virtual library. We also have presentations, chapters from many, many textbooks, books that you can't buy. We have completely put on our website. So it's the only place you can find these things. You get, of course, membership in a global community of cosmetic scientists, the opportunity to win IFSCC awards. And if you go into your, what is it, Perry? The files button.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, on the side there, you're going to see files, and there are some files that you can download. Feel free to. All of them. It's the Young Scientist Prize, the IFSCC Benefit Flyer, and the Benefit Flyer.
Right. So we have 2 awards for scientists, one under the age of 35, 140 and younger, that you can apply for. And there's a flyer with all sorts of details in the files here. The prize is a trip to our next conference or congress. So it's nice. Really a great, wonderful thing to win. The IFSCC hosts on-site educational programs. So not just these webinars, but we send experts around the world to give presentations and seminars. And if you're a member, you get a discounted registration to the IFSCC Congress or conference. And again, in the files button on the website here, you'll find a flyer with all these benefits listed. So that's it. A brief overview of the IFSCC. I'm going to hit stop slide presentation and introduce Perry, who is the IFSCC Chair of Education. He represents the Society of Cosmetic Chemists, which covers the USA and Canada. Take it away, Perry.
All right, thanks. First, I gotta look at this hair. What is going on with this hair? I don't know. All right, we're gonna get going with our presentation here. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much. If you have questions while the presentation is going on, feel free to post in the chat. Mary Lynn is actually going to be monitoring the chat, and at the end we'll go through as many questions as I can get through. But welcome. Today is a introduction presentation, really. I'm calling it the Introduction to Cosmetic Formulating. One of the things that, as a person outside of this industry or just getting into the industry, there's a lot of basic information that you might not know, and hopefully this presentation will cover a lot of that information. Before we get started, I want to just tell you about this thank you gift that I put together. I've been writing about cosmetic formulating for a long time. I put a lot of those collection of articles into this handbook for practical formulating. If you click on the files, you can just download the PDF right there. It's free to you. Thank you. It's just a thank you for joining, and we've got nearly 900 people online. So thank you everybody for joining. All right, in all of my presentations, I have a personal mission. I try to be educational, to inspire, and to entertain. Now, just to ensure that I get one of these, I always like to do a little entertaining. So here we go. I wasn't always a cosmetic chemist. There we go. So hopefully you get at least some entertainment now. All right, let's resume here. All right, so what are we going to learn? Well, today I'm going to go through just an introduction to the cosmetic industry. You know, what is the cosmetic industry? This is the industry that you are formulating in. And the other thing I want to point out is that when I talk to the audience, I realize that not everybody is a formulator, but when I'm speaking to people, I speak to you as a formulator. I'm a formulator. I hope everybody becomes formulators, but I realize that a lot of people online, they are maybe either your salesperson or a marketer person who wants to know about formulators and what formulators care about. Well, this is the kind of thing that I think is important for a formulator to know. And if you're not a formulator, it's important for you to know because it can help you better relate with your formulators. Now, I'm going to go through the cosmetic industry, the types of products that are out there and the formulation forms, the types of raw materials that you need to know about, some testing requirements, and then we're going to do a little bit about setting up a lab, like what's the equipment do you need and what's just the basic way that a lab works. Basically, this is all put together. The information here is designed to make you a better cosmetic chemist. Hopefully I can do that in less than an hour. Just a quick background on me. I didn't know anything about the cosmetic industry before I got into it. I got a chemistry degree from DePaul University. I like chemistry. It was just fun to mix stuff together. But when I got out of college, I had no idea what I was going to do with that degree. You know, when you're in college, you are trained to become a college professor that can teach chemistry. You're not necessarily taught anything about industries. And when I got out of college, I really just stumbled into the cosmetic industry. I worked at a company named Alberto Culver for a number of years. I think I was with them for about 17 years, and then I've been on my own for another 12 years. So I've been a formulation chemist for about 28 years. You can find more about my work at chemistcorner.com. I'm sure a lot of people here have stumbled onto that website. Here are just some of the brands that I have personally worked on, and it was actually quite gratifying to when you create a product and then you go to the store and you see those bottles of those products on the store shelves. That's one of the very cool things about being a cosmetic chemist and a formulator is it's very relatable to the rest of the world. When you say, hey, I work on shampoo, you know, everybody knows what shampoo is. There are other researchers and chemists in other fields that are doing great work, interesting work, but it's just not relatable. You know, doing protein assays for some biotech firm is not as relatable as making a shampoo or conditioner or skin lotions. And really, that's one of the things that I really like about being a cosmetic chemist. One of the most important things, though, that you should realize that almost everything that I learned about formulating, I really learned on the job, and I learned from other formulators. This wasn't stuff that they taught you in college. I found it actually kind of funny that the things that I learned in college, most things just do not apply to what you do on a day-to-day basis as a cosmetic chemist. I remember, surfactants are one of the most important technologies that the cosmetic industry is based on, and in college we barely touched on surfactants. We maybe had one lecture in 4 years. It just isn't a thing. So I want you to know that if you don't know cosmetic chemistry right now and you didn't learn it in college, you're in the same boat as most everybody else who comes into the cosmetic industry. Most of us have learned on the job. And in fact, you don't need a chemistry degree to learn how to formulate. There's a lot of people who don't have chemistry degrees that know how to formulate. But I will say, if you want to get a job in the cosmetic industry as a formulator, you pretty much need a college degree in something like chemistry or chemical engineering. Those are probably the most popular. Some people can get a degree in biology or pharmacy and get into the industry. That certainly does work. But most commonly, your degrees are going to be in either chemistry or chemical engineering. I do want to say, though, that being a cosmetic chemist is great. I had a great time doing formulating. It depends on your own personality and the place that you work, but I found it, as jobs go, it was a rather low stress job. You get to spend your time inventing and mixing up new formulas and testing products. You get to be creative. You can learn a lot. There's always something new to learn in cosmetic formulating. I'm always learning new things, which, I've been in the industry a long time and I can still learn stuff. And that is one of the great things about it. It's fun. And I can't stress enough the fact that your job has an actual impact on people's lives and you make people happy. All in all, it's great being a cosmetic chemist. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the cosmetic industry. What is this industry that we're all in? And we all use products in it. The cosmetic industry touches the lives of people around the world. I think last figures I saw, it's about $450 billion in sales for cosmetic products, which is a really big industry. It's much bigger than like a sports or industries like that. It's just a really big industry. Now, as a formulator, you're not going to be introduced to the industry specifically. When you start on a job as a formulator, you're going to be told, here's a formula, I want you to make this. But if you want to be more of a complete cosmetic chemist, you should really know the industry. And that's going to help you get your career started. It's going to help you get formulation ideas. And it's going to help you stay innovative and keep up with on the latest trends in your formulation skills. One of the things I want to stress as a formulator, when you're starting your careers, don't let yourself get pigeonholed into being a specific kind of formulator. Learn how to formulate everything. Learn the shampoos, learn how to do lotions, learn how to do color cosmetics. Become a complete cosmetic chemist. When you work at a company, one of the things they want you to do is to specialize in a specific thing. And you could go your whole life just making shampoos and conditioners, doing small projects like that. But that's really a detriment to you and your career. So if you're starting a career as a cosmetic chemist, learn how to formulate everything. So let's talk about that. Probably the biggest part of the cosmetic industry is skin products. These are skin moisturizers, body washes, exfoliators, moisturizers, all kinds of products, anti-aging products, skin brightening products, and the like. And a lot of people who are formulators work on skin products. You have to know you have to learn a lot about creating emulsions and that sort of thing. But skin products are probably about 30% of the cosmetic market. The second biggest slice of the cosmetic market is hair care products. These are things like shampoos, conditioners, styling products, hair colors. There's a vast range of cosmetic type technology here. You have to know surfactants for cleansing products. You have to know moisturizing and conditioning ingredients for conditioner products. You have to know how to get things to stay on rinse off products and make the hair easier to comb, make it shiny. There's lots of chemistry and technology that goes into hair products. I will say they make up about 25% of the market. And of course, the things that I thought of when I heard the term cosmetic chemist, I thought cosmetics, it's just the stuff, color stuff that women use to put on their face and change the colors of different parts of their body. But cosmetics, of course, as we've seen, is much more than that. Really, cosmetics is anything you do to your body that will change the appearance without interfering with the biochemistry of the body. But color cosmetics include like lipsticks and blushes and foundations and nail polishes, the kinds of things that just are generally called cosmetics. We call them color cosmetics in the industry. Fragrances and perfumes are another big segment of the cosmetic industry. They make up about 10 to 15% of the market. Color cosmetics makes up about 20% of the market. So if you're in the formulating world and you're working on perfumes, it's a bit more of a niche market. Although I should say, if you are working on fragrances, a lot of times fragrances will be put into skin products and hair products, and people just like to use products that smell better than a box of melted waxy crayons, which is what most surfactant systems smell like without a fragrance. The last part are the oral and personal care products, toothpaste, mouthwashes, whitening strips, deodorants. This is another category that makes up probably about 20% of the market. It's just so altogether, my stats might have not added up exactly to 100. I hope so. I'm just running the numbers. So I'm just giving you a rough estimate of the types of products that you find in the market. And it's great for cosmetic chemists to be able to access all of these products on the market, because you can use those products to get ideas about how to make things, what kind of technology is used, and you can use products that are on the market as a way to become a better cosmetic formulator. I do want to point out that cosmetics are regulated differently around the world. In the United States, which is where I am from and where I mostly formulate, cosmetics are regulated by the FDA. In Europe, the European Commission regulates cosmetics. But in that handbook that you can download for free, I've put a resource list at the end, and that lists a number of countries and the cosmetic regulation places that regulate cosmetics. So there's just links in there, so that should be useful for you there. I do want to point out that there are some things that seem like cosmetics, but they're not cosmetics. They're technically considered over-the-counter drugs. And in the United States, if you are creating one of these products, there is a restrictive active ingredient list, and that means there are only specific ingredients you can use as far as to make the functional ingredients. And there are restricted claims, and you also have to have a drug facts warning like the one you see here. Here is some of the products that they seem like cosmetics, but they are technically over-the-counter drugs in the United States and classified like that other places around the world. Sunscreens, which seems surprising. Europe does not consider sunscreens over-the-counter drugs. In the United States, sunscreens are drugs, and so you're very limited about the sunscreens that the ingredients you can use in sunscreens. We have antiperspirants, we have skin lightening or skin brightening, psoriasis treatments, wart removers, anti-acne products. Toothpastes are cosmetics unless they have fluoride in it, and then if they have fluoride, which means they fight cavities, then they become over-the-counter drugs. Antimicrobial products and topical analgesics. A lot of times people will look at these products and try to make them cosmetics, but if you're making any of these drug claims, technically those become drugs in the United States, and you are restricted in your formulation choices. Okay, that gives you an idea about the types of products. There are also, it's important for you to know who are the companies in this industry. And for cosmetic formulators, you want to know who are the biggest companies, because these are the companies that are going to hire a lot of cosmetic chemists. They have their places around the world. L'Oreal is right now the biggest cosmetic company, selling about $30.8 billion worth of product every year. Now, these numbers are based in 2019. Unilever is the second largest with 23 billion. Estee Lauder is up there, 14 billion. Procter & Gamble, 12 billion. Now, I should say about Procter & Gamble, they're actually much bigger than a $12 billion company. They're, I don't know, 70 or 80 billion. But this is only the slice of their products that count as cosmetics. They sell laundry products. It doesn't count that. They sell food products. It doesn't count that. Shiseido, Coty, LVMF, Beiersdorf, J&J, and Kao, those round out the rest of the top 10. Now, for you as a formulator, what's important to know is get to know these companies, get to know their brands and the types of products that they make. These are the companies that are going to come out with the types of products that consumers like most. They do a lot of research. They use as much cutting edge technology as they can, and you can find some really great products. Now, I will say that sometimes their marketing is a little, it's marketing. So you can't always trust what you're learning from them, but evaluating the products from a cosmetic chemist standpoint, they these companies really make some excellent products. And in addition to companies, you should know their brands. L'Oreal Paris is a big brand. Colgate, another big brand. Gillette, and you can see these are just 15 really large, strong international brands too. I point out these brands because you have to realize consumers are using these products the most. They might use other types of products and other brands might be popular, but right now, most consumers are going to use these products, and it's these brands set the tone for how a product should work, what it should smell like, what it should feel like, what kind of technology. They are setting consumer expectations. And if you're a formulator who's not working for one of these companies, you're going to want to know, what are consumers expecting? And by looking at the formulas of these companies, that's going to help you learn that. All this is to say is you, as a starting formulator or as a formulator at a smaller company or a mid-sized company, these are the brands you're going to want to emulate. Emulate these formulas when you create your own formulas. Now, I'm not saying you have to copy these formulas. That's not what you want to do. But you want to make sure your products perform just as well as these big companies' products, because if you're falling down in any place, consumers might not like your products as much as they expect. Okay, now we've gone through a little bit about the industry. See how we're doing on time here. Looks like we're doing fine. Let's talk a little bit about cosmetic raw materials. If you look, by knowing the raw materials, that's really what sets you apart as a formulator and a chemist in the cosmetic industry. There are lots of other industries that use lots of other chemicals. If you don't know those, the reason you're not a chemist in those industries is because you don't know those raw materials. You have to learn the raw materials to be able to make the formulas in the cosmetic industry. You have to know why you're adding things. You have to know what level you're adding things, and you have to know what are some of the chemical reactions that might be happening between different ingredients. And that is one of the key things, the key pieces of knowledge you have to develop as a cosmetic chemist. Now, there are the cosmetic raw materials that everybody uses are listed in the INCI dictionary. That's the International Nomenclature of Cosmetic Ingredients. That is almost a worldwide standard. It was originally put together by the PCPC, which is the industry regulating group in the United States. This is just it's an industry group, but they set all the rules that we all kind of follow. They work with the EU and other places around the world, and they come up with the names that go into the INCI dictionary. Now, there are about 22,000 ingredients that I saw in the latest edition of the Cosmetic Ingredient Dictionary, and I have to say it would be very difficult for you to memorize what do all 22,000 of those ingredients do. But there is a nice part about that big list. I say you can categorize all of the raw materials that are available for cosmetic chemists into three main groups. And if you learn these first three main groups, that's going to help you be able to figure out what these ingredients do and put them in the buckets where they are. I say there are really only three types of cosmetic ingredients. There are the functional ingredients, and functional ingredients are the ones that are put into your formula to actually provide the benefit. So if you're creating a shampoo, it's the cleanser that actually cleans the hair. If you're creating a skin moisturizer, it's the moisturizing ingredients that moisturize the skin. Those would be the functional ingredients. There are aesthetic modifier ingredients, and these are the ingredients that are put into formulas to help everything be compatible and to work together and to make it smell nice and make it last longer. And so those are specifically put in there for that. Now, as chemists, we would really just want to use functional ingredients, but formulas that are only functional ingredients just are not that good. So you need those aesthetic modifiers to make the products nicer to use and smell better to use. And finally, there are the claims and marketing ingredients, and these are the ones that we put in there to help our marketer people come up with compelling stories that make people want to buy your products. Here's just, I was actually a bio major, and I always loved cladistics and animal kingdoms and phylums and genus. Here is just my sort of classification. So we have functional ingredients. You can see the list there: cleansers, conditioners, drug actives, colorants, fragrances, etc. Then we have the claims ingredients, which are sort of the story ingredients, and we have the aesthetic modifiers. Let's look a little bit more at those. These, I would say, are the most important functional ingredients that you have to learn about. Cleansers. When you get on cleansers, you're talking about surfactants. Surfactants are highly important to learn about because they do so many different things. Surfactants can be both functional and aesthetic materials, but the cleansers are surfactants that actually remove things from surfaces. Then there are conditioning agents. These are both conditioning for hair and moisturizing for skin. We have colorants. Colorants are an interesting one, as are fragrance. Colorants can be functional when they provide color to the surface, as in color cosmetics, but they can also be aesthetic modifier ingredients. Sometimes we'll change the color of, say, a body wash. If we wanted to say it's strawberries and cream body wash, we want to make it red, so you're going to use a colorant to color your formula. Fragrances, you're going to use them to change the odors of your formulas, but you also use them as functional ingredients, as in perfumes. Active ingredients are those that, like AHAs, which will cause exfoliation, or depilatories, which can remove hair from surfaces. So these are chemicals that actually have some functional benefit to the skin and hair. And finally, there are film formers. These are ingredients that help to make hair products, styling products that will form a film and help to shape the hair. And so these are the main functional ingredients. The main aesthetic modifier ingredients, these include solvents like water or mineral oil. And then we have adjuster ingredients, pH adjustments, citric acid, sodium hydroxide, those types of things. We have thickeners to change the rheology. Fragrances, again, are aesthetic modifiers. We have ingredients. I don't like to use the term filler because that's become a negative word, but fillers are really more just like solid solvents. They help to extend pigments in color cosmetics, and they're often vilified by consumers, like, you're just putting fillers in your products. But the reality is, we as cosmetic formulators, we don't just willy-nilly put ingredients in just because we want to, fill out the product. Every ingredient that's put into a cosmetic formula is put in there for a specific reason. There are special effects ingredients like pearlizing agents, and so you can affect whether a product is opaque or what it looks like. We have delivery systems. These are like vesicles and spheres or cyclodextrins that can be used encapsulation techniques to help deliver active ingredients. And then, of course, to make your products last longer, there are the preservatives. As a formulator, you have to learn about all of these aesthetic raw materials, and you're going to have to find the one that works the best for the formulation that you're creating. All right, next up are the claims ingredients. I always refer to them as wiffle dust. I've heard people call them fairy dust. These are ingredients that are added to your formulas that are there to support the marketing story. Now, this is surprising to a lot of people when you first get into the cosmetic industry, that there are these ingredients. You think every ingredient that's in there is having some specific functional effect. Well, the reality is there's a lot of ingredients that are put into cosmetic products: vitamins, botanical extracts, protein, a lot of anti-aging ingredients, a lot of advanced technologies. You create a molecule, you give it a technological name, and then your marketer people can talk about it. But the reality is that these ingredients don't actually have a primary function in there. They might in a laboratory. You can certainly show some benefits to them, but a lot of these ingredients are just dropped in there. They have a botanical extract. They help support the story, but whether that ingredient is in there or not really has no impact on the function of the product. That's just a reality of the cosmetic industry. I do want to say that these are important ingredients, however, because the reason people buy cosmetic products is because of these functional ingredients, whether they're having the effect on them or not. Okay, those are the raw materials that are important. Next up, we've got the types of cosmetic formulas. Now, formulating is a lot like being a cook, and as a cook, you'll need to learn to make stuff like make an omelet or make a pizza or make pasta. It's very similar in the cosmetic industry. You want to learn the types of formulas. Knowing the types of formulas will allow you to create a product that consumers are going to want to use, your marketer people are going to be happy with, and you can really create a unique experience for a consumer when using your products by putting them in these different forms. The simplest form is the solution. These are things like shampoos or perfumes. They are just a mixture of compatible ingredients. They're really simple to put together because all the ingredients are just mixed together, and it's pretty easy to put together a solution formula. A more difficult type of formula are creams and lotions. These are emulsions that are putting things like oil and water together. Now, oil and water don't mix, but to make them compatible, you use something like an emulsifier, and that will help to create tiny particles that will be suspended in either water or in oil, and that will give you the cream or the lotion and allow you to deliver active ingredients in a way that is beneficial to consumers. Another type is ointments. Ointments are mostly anhydrous formulas, so they have no water. They're very thick. They are greasy, and you push them around. But that is a form of product. The Vaseline tub of petroleum jelly, that's an ointment, and that is an effective format for cosmetic formulas. There are powder products. You can have powders are most common in color cosmetics, of course, but powders are also found in shampoos. The very popular nowadays is the spray or the powdered shampoo. You have to come up with those powdered forms. Another great form is the gel, and the gel usually features a thickening agent. So it's a solution product that has a thickening agent that has a gel consistency. Thickeners typically are things like carbomer or xanthan gum. These are the types of things that can make your products thicker. Actually, a popular question that I've been getting recently is about how do you thicken up hand sanitizers, and the most common thickening agent in that case has been carbomer, but it's really going to depend on your whole formula. Another type of formula is the stick formula. Sticks are most common for lipsticks and for underarm deodorants, but essentially depends on how you make those, but those are going to be something like a stearic acid or a stearic soap, which hardens up, and you have your actives in that solid form. And then when the product is put on, it's not a product that anyone wants to touch, so it works well with packaging. Then finally, the other formulation type is aerosols. All of the types that are discussed here could be turned into aerosols with, I suppose, with the exception of the stick product. But essentially, it's a pressurized can. You push an actuator button, and it dispenses the product. There's a lot of physics involved there, but it's very much tied with the type of packaging. So formulating an aerosol product, you have to not only know your formulation, but you also have to know about your can, your dip tube length, your spray patterns. It's a much more specialized and complicated area of cosmetic formulating, but it's way interesting, I have to say, especially if you like motion of molecules and that sort of thing. All right, so we're going to go through now quickly the 6 steps to creating a cosmetic product. These 6 steps are, first, you got to get set up your lab. There's picking a benchmark. There's finding your starting formulas, your raw materials, making your prototypes, and testing. Just quickly go through that. Now, one of the things you have to know about if you want to formulate, well, you have to have the right equipment. And what equipment is that? In college, most of the equipment that I dealt with in college was beakers, and we had distilling columns, glass distilling columns, and Erlenmeyer flasks. You don't use Erlenmeyer flasks too much in the cosmetic formulating world, but you do use things like pipettes and beakers. Of course, you use beakers. Another thing that people would use in college was the magnetic mixer. And magnetic mixers are great when there's no viscosity in your formula, but cosmetic formulas almost always are thick, and a magnetic mixer is almost useless for a cosmetic chemist. The important essential lab equipment that you need your containers, you need some weighing equipment, so a nice scale. Everything in your formula should be done in grams and percentages. You're going to want to have proper mixers. You want a heating and cooling device, so a hot plate and then a way to cool it down, a nice water bath where you can put ice. Of course, then you need lab supplies, weigh boats, beakers, pipettes, and other spatulas, thermometers, other types of stuff that will help to in creating formulas. And you want testing equipment. Actually, I have here, this is actually the exact type of mixer that I had used. It's got the center stir mixer there. It's got the controller there. This is classic old timey stuff. The mixers nowadays are a lot more specialized. They might be digital. It's a clock there, but I like this guy. It still works, and it's the kind of thing that can be replicated on a large scale. That's one of the things you have to realize as a formulator. If you are creating products that are going to be mass produced, you have to create them in a way that can translate from a lab size beaker to a 3,000 gallon tank. And a center stir mixer like that works very well. If you have one of those hand homogenizers that you might use, like a kitchen tool or something, and you can make a small batch using that thing, that works great for making a small batch like that. But you're not going to be able to get that shear rate and that mixing speed on a really large scale. And so if you make a formula in a small beaker that can't translate into a larger size product, you're going to have to figure out a better way to create your products. It's just not going to work. All right, step 2 of putting together formulas. I always encourage people to work with a benchmark. A benchmark is essentially a product that's on the market right now, some commercial product that's going to approximately duplicate what your desired product is. This essentially, using a benchmark like this can help you. It gives you a target, something to formulate to. It gives you an idea of what you want to make. When you're picking a benchmark, you want to find something that has the performance characteristics that work the way you want to, that has the aesthetics that you want. Maybe it smells a certain way, it looks a certain way, or it feels a certain way. So you want to find that. You also want to pick products that are popular on the market. These are what consumers are using, and these are what consumers expect. And so you want to make sure that your formulas deliver in a way that a consumer is going to like and expect, because that's going to make them want to buy the product a second time. You can use marketing to sell a product the first time. People might, they read the marketing and they buy into the story, and it's very compelling. But if a consumer uses your product and they don't like it, no matter how good your marketing is, it's going to be a hard time to get them to buy something again. So that's where you as the formulator comes in. You got to make products that is going to work so well that the consumer wants to use them. Just make sure you're matching consumer expectations. When you get your benchmark, and in formulating in general, I want to stress how important it is to use products, quantify what's important. What makes a good foam? Is it the bubble size? Can we characterize the bubble size, or is it the thickness, or is it how fast it goes out of the hair? use any product that you're working on. If it's lipstick, how good does the color stay on the lips? And if you're a guy out there working on lipsticks, yes, you should put lipstick on and see how it works. Never be afraid to try the products that you're working on. I always found it amazing that I had worked with chemists who would make formulas, but they never use their own formulas. And I just don't know how you become a good cosmetic chemist if you're not using your own formulas. You have to become an expert in using formulas. One time I was working on a Tresemme shampoo project, and I washed my hair about 1,500 times in 1 year. I had a lot of prototypes. I was probably the most shampooed head in America, and I'm proof positive that you probably can't shampoo too much. I haven't lost too much hair. So all this is to say, become an expert at your own formulation. Okay, now that you've got your setup, you've got your raw materials, let's get your starting formulas. Nobody in this industry just starts from scratch. You don't start just mixing chemicals together. I mean, you could do that, but it just is a lot harder. It's a lot easier to start with a starting formula. Now, in a lot of companies, the company I was at, we had a library of formulas that we had successfully sold. And a lot of times what you do as a formulator is you will inherit a formula, and then you will modify it for regulatory reasons or for marketing reasons or for just to improve performance. But you're starting with those formulas from your company. But if you're working on a formula that you've never worked on before, there are places you can go. There's chemical suppliers. They have formularies. And actually, there's a recent podcast I've been listening to called Formula Girls from Colonial Chemicals, which is very interesting. They go through and they discuss formulas that Colonial Chemicals has put together. But companies like Croda and Stepan and other large raw material companies do put together really good formularies. And so that's a great place to start. Now, I want to say that those are starting formulas. They aren't formulas that you can just take from the supplier and now start selling them. No, you have to do the adjusting yourself. You have to do the testing yourself. You, as the manufacturer of the finished product, are the ones who are responsible for making sure that they're safe and they're tested. Other places you can get formulas, looking in patents is a great way to find a starting formula. You can't take a patent formula and then just start selling that. You have to start with it, modify it significantly, but it's a great place to start. There are some excellent books out there on formulating, the cosmetic and manufacturing of cosmetic, or the manufacturing and chemistry of cosmetics. In that handbook that I put together, in the resources section, I list a whole bunch of books that have formulation resources. Trade journals like Cosmetics and Toiletries, Happy, they will also have formularies which are useful. And there is a way to take an ingredient list and come out with a formula from that ingredient list. That's something that's a little more detailed. I teach that in my practical cosmetic formulation course, but you can do that there. All right, next is getting your raw materials. Where are you going to get these raw materials and learn about raw materials? Now, I said there are 22,000 raw materials. I gave the broad categories of raw materials, but as far as learning about them, the INCI dictionary is a great source for that. Not everybody can afford to buy the INCI dictionary. It's a little pricey. But you can find the buyer's guide. Happy.com is a great place. It has a listing of the suppliers who have those raw materials, and you can learn about the raw materials and what they do a bit from your suppliers. Another recent resources, within the last 10 years, the ulprospector.com, Canody.com, or just Nody.com, Chemberry.com. These are aggregators, and what they've done is they take information from suppliers around the world and they aggregate them all into one place. And so as a formulator, this is a great place to find sources of raw materials. So if you want to get the raw materials, you could do that and find information about the raw materials. And of course, trade shows like In Cosmetics or Suppliers Day in New York City, these are great places to learn about raw materials. Now, I do want to tell you though, as a formulator, as a chemist, the information that you might get from a supplier about a raw material, you shouldn't look that as settled science or completely reliable. Just remember, they are in the business of getting you to buy their raw materials. So there is a marketing aspect to it. But be a good formulator, be a good scientist, and remain skeptical about some of the claims that you'll hear. I see a lot of companies advertising, paraben-free, all-natural preservatives. The reality is that maybe under specific conditions, the ingredients might be effective preservatives, but under most conditions, under your formula, they're probably not going to work. All right, next up, I do want to mention, if you want to learn a little bit more about formulating, there is this course that I put together. You can check that out in the offers tab up there. If you need to get raw materials, you can order them directly from the supplier. You can meet salespeople at SCC meetings or trade shows. There's another place to get raw materials. You can source raw materials if you're just experimenting on places like Amazon or getting things directly from the supplier or eBay. There are other distributors online, smaller distributors that can give you smaller concentrations. But I have to say, if you're going to go into production, you're going to want to work directly with a salesperson or directly with the chemical producer or with their approved distributor. Because they are only going to be able to certify the safety and the specifications of the specific ingredient you get. If you buy something from Amazon, you have no idea whether that is a reliable ingredient. I would not count on that if you're going to create products that you want to sell on the market. All right, step 5 is making prototypes. And this is just when you get those starting formulas, you say, okay, what do I do with this now? Just a basic procedure when you're working with prototypes. Start with the largest volume ingredient first. You want to add the powders early on. If you have to heat the formula, you want to do that after you've added powders in most cases. But a lot of times you're going to have to melt ingredients, so you have to heat them up. You often will want to mix things. If you have to heat things and melt things, you want to mix them for at least 20 minutes to make sure you get a good mixture. You want to cool down your batches and then add sensitive ingredients like fragrances, preservatives, and some extracts at below 40 C. This is just a basic procedure that works with some formulas, a lot of formulas. It's going to, of course, depend on the type of formula that you're making. All right, the final step is testing your prototypes. Knowing how to test your cosmetics will ensure that it makes your high quality, safe, and legal products. The rules of cosmetic industry is that it's illegal to sell unsafe products. So make sure your products are safe. The way you can make sure that they're safe is doing quality control or quality assurance testing. Depending, of course, on your product, you can do pH testing if it's aqueous. Viscosity test is always important, checking out the rheology. You want to check the odor. You want to check the appearance. You're going to have to do a stability test. So make sure you do stability testing and make sure you do microbial testing to ensure that your product is not contaminated. And of course, you want to always do performance testing to make sure the product that you put together works the way it's supposed to work. All right, so here's summing up the 6 steps to creating a cosmetic formula. First, you want to get set up with your lab. You want to pick your benchmark to give you a target of which to formulate to. You want to create and find your starting formulas. You want to gather up your raw materials. You want to put together your prototypes. And then finally, make sure you test and refine your prototypes. I've got a list here of it's a helpful guide put together by the FDA for people for smaller manufacturers who are creating cosmetics. This just gives you ideas about good manufacturing procedure and that sort of things. All right, it looks like we're coming to the end. This was an introduction to cosmetic formulating. Now, a lot of these topics could be way more expanded. I just wanted to give you a big overview of the cosmetic industry, the types of ingredients that we use for formulating, in a general sense, the types of formulas that you put together, the types of things that you want to look for when you're working on formulas. We talked about developing the 6-step procedure for developing formulas, and we finished up talking about how do you test formulas and what kind of equipment do you want. That brings us to an end. I do want to just point out this resource here, which is just amazingly helpful. I'm learning new stuff all the time. This is the Chemist Corner Forum. And on this forum, it's free to join. And what you have here are formulators from around the world, just helping each other out, answering questions. giving their thoughts about how you do things. And if you're having trouble with a formula or a formulation question, or you want to know what formulators care about, to go to this forum and take a look at it. We have over 12,000 people that are online, and it's a worldwide phenomenon, really. That brings me to a close. Here's my contact information, Perry at chemistcorner.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Perry Romanowski, and I do Twitter. Chemist Corner is where I Twitter. If you want to call me, feel free to call me, although I respond better to emails. And that'll bring us to the end here. And I guess we have some time for some questions. Hey, Marilyn, that worked all right there? You are on mute.
Sorry, first time user.
Long time listener.
Why don't I talk for a minute while you scroll through the questions posted in chat?
I think that's a great idea. And let me get a little sip of water here.
Okay, I just wanted to say, Perry, again, is the head of the IFSCC Education Committee. He's in charge of putting together these webinars. And we're going to have a variety of formats and levels of science. So today clearly was a basic intro to our field, very interesting. But we'll also have deep dives into highly technical subjects. They won't apply to everybody, but we have access to the best experts around the world, so why not bring them on to do a webinar on their area of expertise? So you'll see some of those. We also might do some panel discussions, which are always very interesting. We might do some question and answer sessions, just very general, ask a cosmetic formulator a question. And we'll also do some non-technical webinars. And if you allow me, our next webinar is in 2 weeks. It's Maite San Miguel Lopez, and that will be a non-technical seminar. It's on marketing about the world after COVID in the cosmetic chemistry industry. Now, if you'll permit me, I'm going to speak in Spanish for a minute. Para la gente que habla en español, este será nuestra primera webinar en español en 2 semanas, el 22 de julio. La señora fabulosa Maite San Miguel López de Chile y también los Estados Unidos presentará una webinar con el título Adaptándose al nuevo escenario mundial alterno a la industria cosmética. So it'll be our first webinar in Spanish in 2 weeks. Maite will do it again in the fall in English. So muchísimas gracias a mi muy amiga Maite thank you very much to my good friend Maite, she's fabulous, for offering to do this seminar. Okay, Perry, you ready?
I am ready, yes.
All right.
I have to apologize. The questions are, boy, what's going on with this hair?
There's a lot of questions, and let me say again, if you have questions about becoming a cosmetic chemist, about changing careers, about education, personally, I would tell you to go to chemistcorner.com. There's a discussion forum. These things are talked about in great detail. So that's where I would direct you.
Yeah, and if you're putting a question there and I don't get to it on this here, because questions are coming very quick, I'm having a hard time keeping up, but I will try to answer it answer it via email. Okay, here's a question. Just the first one I saw. Is there really a major difference between salon hair products and drugstore products? No, there is not a major difference, at least in terms of the cosmetic formulating. When you learn to formulate and when you're working for companies, often the same corporation is making a salon brand hair product and a drugstore brand hair product. We all use the same raw material sources. We have all the same raw material suppliers or access to them. And so no, there's nothing special about salon hair products versus drugstore products. They're good ones. They're good and bad ones that are salon and good and bad ones that are store brand. But as far as formulating goes, no, there's nothing different. Another one is there. Another question was, can we get a copy of the slides? Yes, I will provide you a copy of the slides. We'll send a replay notice afterwards, and I'll provide a link to the slides there. Here's a question: what is the minimum quantity that should be taken before taking it to the shop floor? Not sure. I think minimum quantity that should be taken. Yeah, sorry, I don't exactly know that. Yeah, sorry. Hi, I'm a cosmetic formulator working for a cosmetic company, but am thinking of doing some consultation work on the side. Do you have any suggestions for this? This is a very interesting question. First of all, if you're working for a company, make sure that they will allow you to do consulting on the side. Not every company would find that okay, but if they do, there's some excellent opportunities for you, because the reality is that a lot of people that are consultants right now and have the expertise, they are not tapped into the internet and the online world, and so there is actually a big hole between people who want the services of a formulating chemist and the ability to access them. If I were starting out as a cosmetic chemist and I wanted to become a consulting formulator, first of all, I would learn how to formulate everything. Learn how to do skin products, hair products, color cosmetics. Now, you don't have to become an expert in all of those. You certainly want to be competent in all of those. So first, you want to be a complete cosmetic chemist. You want to, second, learn about the regulations and the right way to do things. These include things like the right way to do labeling. You want to find out the rules that apply, the ingredients that are restricted in the place that the products are going to sell. So step one is become an actual expert in a wide variety of areas. But the second step is you probably want to specialize in something. There right now is a big dearth of availability of people who are experts in the cosmetic industry in color cosmetics. And this is just because color cosmetics, if you're an expert in color cosmetics, you probably work for one of the big companies that makes color cosmetics. And that way, if somebody has the idea that they want to start a lipstick company and they will say, I need a cosmetic chemist that could do this, there aren't a lot of those out there. And so if you wanted to become a consultant, pick a niche like color cosmetics. But you can pick a niche like learn how to do shampoo formulator, hair care formulating, or skincare formulating. Become an expert in that. Now, once you specialize in something, now you want to do stuff like make presentations, build your reputation, develop a LinkedIn profile, create a website, a way for people to contact you to get your services. Not only do you have to know how to do formulating, but you also have to learn how to become a business person, because formulating and running a consulting business are two separate things, and you have to learn that. But those are some of the suggestions that I would start, and some of those things you can start doing before you even become a consultant or start offering services. You can certainly develop an online presence, a LinkedIn presence, a Twitter presence, Instagram, and those will be the sources of your future jobs. People will find you. If you develop a website, you write content on that website, become known as an expert at something, and people can find you. So those are some suggestions I had there. Now the question, what are the common issues when transferring from lab scale to plant scale? Well, probably the hardest thing is that in the lab scale, you can get mixing rates that are so much higher than you can on the lab scale. And so that's one of the biggest things you have to consider. That's why you don't really want to use really high shear levels on a lab scale to make something work, and then you can't do it on a lab on a production scale. When you are transferring up, what you want to do is go from the lab scale to, say you start out with a 500 milligram or 500 gram batch. Then instead of going 500 grams to 2,000 kilograms, you really want to go from 500 grams to a 5-gallon pail. I have to also apologize that I'm not speaking in metric. I know most of the world is metric. In the United States, we still use gallons and pounds and that sort of thing. I haven't changed my brain to adapt to that. So that's what you want to do. So you want to do a pilot plant scale level of things. But some of the things you have to worry about, the powders. On a lab scale, powders go in. They can go in relatively easy. It's a little challenging to create a carbomer solution on a lab scale. You'll get little fish eyes if you put the powders in too fast. But when you're on production scale, that becomes a much bigger problem. If you pour the carbomer in too fast, it just does not mix in properly. This could happen with celluloses and that kind of thing too. So getting your powders right, figuring out, a lot of times what you want to do is pre-mix the powders with a liquid and get that going. Another one you have to worry about is your dyes. One of the production tips is put your dyes in early. So if you have your water and then you put your dyes in and then do a color check, because it's so easy to make a color mistake with a dye. If you just a little wrong measurement can create a completely different color. And so you want to have a color match right up front when it's just water and dye. That way, if you screw up, you can dump out the water and start over. You don't want to have it all the way at the end, put the color at the end, and then it's it's the wrong color, and then that's a bigger problem. So those are some of the issues. The heating and cooling can be an issue. In a lab, you can heat things really fast and cool them quite fast. On a production scale, you don't get that heating and cooling. And so when you're creating a formula on the lab scale, just make sure you test it on different heating and cooling speeds. Okay, let's see what kind of questions we got here. Jennifer says, can you recommend an affordable online cosmetic formulation course that could be taken while working a full-time job? Yeah, you can check out Chemist Corner or check out the offer right there. That's links to a course that I put together on raw materials. Okay. Sharon says, Perry, can you explain why PEG 40 cannot be combined with water? Thank you. I think PEG 40, I don't know the solubility of it, but PEG 40 should be able to combine with water. Although if that specifically can't combine with water, it's just because it's not ethoxylated well enough. I would think it could be water soluble. I have to check into that more specifically. Let's see. Casey, thanks for the kind words there. Let's see if we have any more questions here. Lucy says, what is your opinion on cosmetic science education programs like the ISIPCA or the Cincinnati program? Are they worth it? I don't know specifically the ISIPCA. I do know the Cincinnati program is an excellent program if you want to get a master's degree or even an undergraduate degree in cosmetic science. These courses are taught by people who have industry experience. So they aren't just university people who learned about cosmetics by reading about it. These are people who have actually worked in the industry, and you get a lot deeper science. One of the problems with a lot of online courses that you can find out there, and my courses is very similar to there's that same problem with some of my courses, is that you don't get the in-depth science that you would get at a university. So some like the University of Cincinnati, it's going to get into the mathematical equations of things. It'll talk about Stokes' law, and you'll talk about the more theoretical stuff, which is gives you a much better breadth of knowledge and much more expertise in a specific subject. The problem with learning all of that stuff is at the end of the day, you got to say, what do I mix together to make this product? Just tell me that. And a lot of people want that. And so you find that with a lot of online courses. That's one of the things. But if you want to get a degree in cosmetic science and really go in depth and become an expert at it, a program like the University of Cincinnati or the program at Fairleigh Dickinson, I'm not, like I said, I'm not completely familiar with the ISIPCA. But if it's run through a university, I have more faith in it than others. So hopefully that helps there. Okay, what do we got here? Perry, will you be updating existing courses? Yeah, at some point I will be updating. When you're talking about actives like probiotics, I do want to speak about some of these new technologies that you hear about, specifically probiotics, CBD oil, epigenetics, the microbiome. These are all very popular things that are very trendy to talk about, and people are coming out with products with these things. One of the challenges I have with talking about these things and teaching about these things is that the science on these things is not really settled science. We are just at the beginning of our knowledge about the microbiome. We're at the beginning of our knowledge about the usefulness of stem cells or epigenetics, and people, marketers in particular, they want to just get this technology into a product and start selling it. And as a scientist, I find it very difficult to be rah-rah about stuff when I look at the studies and I see that the study had these amazing claims, but it was on a sample of like 20 people. And so I'm very skeptical of any kind of new technology, new popular technology that's coming out. And I'm not saying that these technologies aren't fascinating and aren't going to have a big impact on the cosmetic industry. It's just right now, just from a scientific standpoint and the evidence available, they are much more just marketing ingredients than they are actually things that can have a real impact on your formulations. And that's why I haven't gotten into a lot of things like that. Okay, let's see. Michelle says, and Nilesh says, inspiring cup, I'm now thinking of jumping into the cosmetic field. Yay. Well, I am here to tell you that I love the cosmetic field. The cosmetic industry is just so interesting. There's so much technology and there's so many different aspects that you could learn about, and you're creating products that you get to use. For 17 years, I never bought my own shampoo. I just would make my own stuff, and it was so much fun doing that. And it's just such a gratifying thing to see your product for sale on the store shelves. And I can't say enough about being a cosmetic chemist. It's a really fun job. Okay, we're a little bit after 11. Typically, we run out of things here. I'll answer a few more questions. I've got some time. Let's see. Ruth said, kind of repeat what corner, she was talking Chemist Corner. So chemistcorner.com is the website that I have. And if you look at the forum, chemistcorner.com/forum, there's a lot of information about formulating, being a cosmetic chemist. Or Ruth, you can just send me an email if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer. Marcel says, as a formulator, what is the biggest challenge that you experience in formulating? Well, I have to be honest with you. I think the biggest challenge is creating a product that can differentiate you from everybody else. It's very difficult to come up with formulas that really work better or differently than your competition. The hardest thing about the cosmetic industry is that the technology has been around for a while, and the innovation that's going on in the industry has less to do with the ingredients and how they work and more to do with where we're getting the ingredients from. And this is great. It's better for the planet. It's better for the environment, focusing on sustainability and using plant-based ingredients. It's better to use these things than using petroleum ingredients, which we're eventually going to run out. So coming out with sustainable ingredients, I think it's excellent. The problem is that our raw material suppliers are focused on that. They're not focused on creating the next new active ingredient or the next new functional ingredient that can make things work better. The next polymer that's going to make your hair style, you can shape it however you want, and it holds in high humidity, low humidity. They're not working on the next moisturizer that's going to moisturize your skin for, instead of a day, it's going to do it for a week. So there's some technological shortcomings that we get right now. And, one of the reasons is that it's hard. It's really hard to make a new functional ingredient. I did a comparison of shampoos. I was working on the top selling shampoos 20 years ago. If you look at the raw material ingredient list of those and the ones now, they're pretty much the same formulas. They're using the same technology. The technology hasn't changed. So a big challenge for a formulator is coming out with something that's really unique and really new. However, I will say that this whole movement of clean formulation, while I think it's just kind of a marketing gimmick, and I find I'm a little cynical about it, it is giving cosmetic chemists new opportunities to try something new. Say you want to make a cleanser and you can't use sodium lauryl sulfate. Well, you've got to find some new options, and you want to find new options that work as good as what we used to have, what we used to be able to use. The same is going on with preservatives. And so while these are big challenges and you're not creating products that work better, you are getting an opportunity to try new things. And that's really, really kind of fun and interesting. But the challenging part is really just getting your product to stand out. Okay. Do I know anything about cosmetic peptides? Actually, I think our webinar with Carl Lintner was about peptides. So I'd suggest you go check out that one. It was the third in our series of webinars. You go to ifscc.org and check out the education tab. You can find the old webinars. Bianca asked, will we be able to rewatch the stream? Yeah, we have filmed the stream. It continues to go on there. Thanks for the kind words, Maria. Ignacio asks, what do you think about shampoos without sulfates? I think sulfate-free shampoos are really just a marketing gimmick. It makes sense to me. If you look at the top-selling shampoos, almost all of them are using sulfates. Sodium lauryl sulfate, ammonium lauryl sulfate, sodium lauryl sulfate, or ammonium lauryl sulfate. So the big guys are using sulfates. So what that opens up is an opportunity for newer brands to come in and differentiate themselves. They say, my differentiation is that I don't use sulfates. Now, that doesn't mean your product's better. It doesn't mean it's going to work better or foam better or be safer or be less irritating. It's just a way that you can differentiate yourself. From a cosmetic formulating standpoint, this is great. It's like, okay, everybody uses sulfates. Let's try to make a formula that works just as good or even better using non-sulfates. The reality is it's very difficult to do that. Sodium lauryl sulfate, it can be irritating at high levels, but really it's a cheap and effective surfactant. It works great. The things that you hear about sulfates and being bad for hair, I've not seen evidence of that. And quite frankly, I have looked at it. I have done tress studies and I've looked at different surfactants and their effect on tresses. And I am not convinced that being sulfate free helps in any real way. It doesn't help with keeping the color in your hair better. If you want to keep color in hair better, the best thing you can do is just don't wash it. Use those powdered shampoos, brush it out, because the more you wash it, the more the color washes out. So that's kind of my perspective on it. I think from a formulary standpoint, though, it's a good opportunity to experiment and come up with new formulas. Okay, we've got Solomon. Is Chemist Corner accredited online? If you will, the school provides certificate diplomas. Let me just tell you a little bit about my thoughts on that. No, there's no accreditation for Chemist Corner courses. I create the courses, I create the content, and they're created for education. You do get a certificate if you go through at the end and you finish that. But I want to caution people. You look around the internet and you're going to find promises of diplomas and certifications. In the cosmetic industry, these certifications don't really mean much. There is not the certified cosmetic chemist. Companies don't look for that. If you want a job as a cosmetic formulator, the number one thing that you're going to need is a degree in chemistry, a degree from a university. A degree in chemical engineering helps. If you're going to get hired on as a chemist, that's what you want to do. Now, a course like mine, or other courses that are online, you can find those. They're great for practical information. They will make you a better formulator. They will make you better at doing interviews. You'll be able to speak more knowledgeably about things. And you have a certificate and you can put it on your resume if you like. But the people that are hiring cosmetic chemists out there, they don't look at these pieces of paper and say, well, you don't have a college degree, but you have that certificate. I'm going to hire you. The reality is that does not happen. It would be nice if it did. And there are certainly colleges that are creating courses and cosmetic programs. And there are some excellence out there. The UK Society of Cosmetic Scientists has an excellent 2-year program that it's done online. The South Africa Society of Cosmetic Chemists has a great program that they do. It's a correspondence course, so you can learn excellent information, but don't think that you're going to get a diploma from somewhere online and then you're going to be a cosmetic chemist. It just doesn't happen that way. Okay, got a few more questions. Erica said, I'm looking for a cosmetic formula consultant. I don't do formulating consulting, but if you go into Chemist Corner and check out the forum, there are a whole list of cosmetic chemists in there who do take on projects like that. Maysam says, as cosmetic science student interested in formulation, what is the simplest and best type of cosmetic product to start with? A great type of product to start with, if you could create a cologne or a perfume, those are good to start with. Those are easy to make. If you start with a fragrance oil, I think something like a body wash or a shampoo, that's a relatively straightforward type of formula to create. Also making things like bath bombs or balms, lipsticks are an interesting one to make. The more difficult things are doing emulsions and those kinds of mixtures of oils and water. So I would stick with the solution types and the balm types. Those are probably the best ones to start with. Madeline says, what is your take on the use of natural plant pigments as colorants in cosmetics? Great question. Well, especially in the United States, but actually in the EU and around the world, some of the most highly regulated ingredients that go into cosmetics are the colorants. And that's because when the regulations were being created back in the 1930s, actually it started in the 1906 was the first drug regulation, and then 1938 there was the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. One of the impetuses for creating the regulations about cosmetics was that people were putting colorants into their cosmetics that were harming people, that were causing blindness. And so these were significant issues. Mercury poisoning, another problem. And so when the cosmetic industry was set up in the United States, they specifically made a list of colorants that were allowed. Now, so if you're not on this list of an allowed colorant, you can't use it in your cosmetic product. So just because something is a plant extract and it has a color, if it's not on that approved list of colorants for the FDA, and the EU has a list of approved colorants and unapproved colorants, but just using a plant extract, it's not legal to do that. So I would not encourage you to do anything where you're using colorants from plants or other sources that have not been specifically verified as a legal colorant. It's, people talk about how the cosmetic industry is not regulated in the United States, and we are we allow a lot more stuff than, say, the EU does or other places around the world. But the one place where we are highly regulated is colorants. So don't use unapproved colorants, and I don't think those plant ingredients are allowed. So there are some plant ingredients that are allowed colorants. You have to look at the list of the FDA colorants. Vicky says, can you comment on the EWG as a resource? The EWG, if you don't know, is the Environmental Working Group, and it is a non-governmental organization that they started out in the agricultural area talking about food and the environment and farming, but then they got into the cosmetic industry and they took their eye on that, and presumably they put together a database, the Skin Deep database is what it's called, that is supposed to tell you about the safety of ingredients. They have a score ranking of a 1 to 10, safe or not safe, toxicity. me personally, I don't think it's a good resource. It's misleading. It's not science based. They also don't change their ratings based on new information. If once something gets rated as dangerous, if there was new information that came on board, they would not unrank it as dangerous. But the whole notion of ranking ingredients based on 1 to 10, based on some sort of arbitrary scale, it actually is a misunderstanding of risk and toxicity, because what it ignores is all ingredients are toxic depending on the dose. Even water at a high enough dose is going to be toxic. So you can't simply look at an ingredient, look at the molecule and say, oh, that's toxic. You have to say, how much is the exposure? What's the route of exposure? And those are the things that professional toxicologists do. The SCCS in Europe and the CIR in the United States, they look at cosmetic ingredients. They say what levels have been determined to be safe, and that's the way you should look at cosmetic ingredients. When the environmental working group, they don't even consider that piece. They say, well, this is an estrogen blocker, so it gets an 8 on safety, or this is a fragrance, so it's automatically a 7 or 8 on safety. It's not science-based, so if you're serious about chemical safety and ingredient safety, go to sources that are produced by toxicologists, not by fear-mongering groups like the EWG, the Cosmetic Ingredient Review Board, the CIR, or the SCCS in England, which is the Committee on Consumer Safety, so Scientific Committee on Science Safety, and that is a much better source. Okay, I've got a little more time. I'm going to start wrapping this up. We're 20 minutes over, and boy, my voice is shot here. I thank everybody for attending. I very much do. I'll answer 2 more questions, but I thank everybody for attending. This has been very nice to see everybody attend. We had over 1,000 people at one point online, and it's just, I hope you found the information helpful and relatable. This is really just my perspective on the cosmetic industry. I've been in industry for a long time. I've been formulating. I've worked for big companies. I've done some consulting work. And I've just kept my eye on how the cosmetic industry is going. There's a lot of great people in the cosmetic industry. There's a lot of conscientious people, and people want to make products that consumers like and that are effective. And, I just love being a cosmetic chemist. All right, let me get 2 more questions here. Let's see. Sabina says, hi, Perry. Are products formulated with 10 or 20% niacinamide or a higher percentage of vitamin C? That question is gone. Sorry, the scrolling happens, and now I lost that question. I should have highlighted. But I think your question was, and I'll look more specifically in the thread. But I think the question was, how do companies like The Ordinary say that they have 10% niacinamide and then they make claims? Well, the way that's done is that you've got to look at specifically how they make the claim. Now they're going to say it's got 10% niacinamide in there, but they're not going to specifically attribute any sort of benefit of the product to that niacinamide. They're not going to say niacinamide will reduce your hyperpigmentation. That would make it a drug claim. They might say with 10% niacinamide, and they hope that you've read beauty blogs, or you've read advertisements, or media stories, and you've got the notion in your head that, hey, niacinamide, that's a good ingredient. And then you see, oh, well, this one has 10%. It must be a really good ingredient. And so at least this is the way it works in the United States. A lot of things that come on as active ingredients, they don't specifically claim it, and they rely on you to hopefully by osmosis that you understand what they're doing. Okay. I will take one more question here. One more question. All right, well, you're asking about my opinion here. Danielle says, what's your opinion about the efficacy of dermocosmetics? Are they better than mass-produced products and the same or different than the marketing channel? I don't really want to get into specific brands, but you're worth the last question. I'm going to say, I will say this. There's nothing about any brand on the market that is using technology that everyone else can't use. And so I would expect that Dermocosmetics produces a perfectly good product. They've probably done consumer research and they've created a formula that works well for people. I see no reason or evidence that those products are going to work better than a mass-produced product by a company like Unilever or P&G or L'Oreal, companies that hire PhD chemists who do basic research and formulators, and they have millions and millions of dollars that go into researching and developing their products. It's difficult for me to believe that a small company who doesn't have nearly the kind of resources that these big companies have can produce something that works markedly better than anything that a big company or a store brand is going to produce. So I haven't used the product specifically. I would be skeptical that it works better than what you can get in the store. So, okay, I am sorry, I am all tapped out here. I'm sorry if I did not get to your questions. I will finish one more question here. There have been a couple of questions about FDA-approved cosmetics. And I guess the question, I haven't seen all the questions, but I guess the question is, does the FDA approve cosmetics? In the United States, no, the FDA does not approve cosmetics. That's it. The FDA has rules about what cosmetic manufacturers have to do to produce legal products in the United States. The rules are pretty simple. Number one is you cannot produce or sell an unsafe cosmetic product. Now, what is an unsafe cosmetic product? As far as the FDA is concerned, you have to be able to prove that your product is safe. That means you have to have done the safety testing, or you've used ingredients that have been reviewed by the CIR and they have been proven safe at specific levels. You are not using colorants that are unapproved by the FDA. The FDA there are specific colorants that you're only allowed to use in cosmetics. But the FDA does not ever say this is an approved cosmetic product. It just doesn't work that way. What they will do is if they will monitor the industry and see what products are out there. They will respond to complaints if there's products that have caused problems for people. And they will give guidance about good manufacturing. The FDA will also go through and do inspections on manufacturing facilities to make sure you're following good manufacturing procedures. But at no point does the FDA certify a cosmetic or approve a cosmetic. It just doesn't work that way, and that's not the way cosmetics are regulated in the United States. Having said that, you cannot produce unsafe cosmetics. That's the #1 rule. And you also can't lie about your products. And if you're going to make a claim about your products, you have to be able to demonstrate that that claim that you're making about your product is true. And the other wrinkle is don't make drug claims on your cosmetic products, at least in the United States, as far as the FDA is concerned. Okay, that does bring me to the end. I thank you all so very much for joining. It is really just a pleasure for me to get to talk about a topic that I like talking about it. I like learning about it. I like working in this industry. I hope you have the same kind of experience that I've had. It's just enjoyable. I encourage you, if there's an area that you don't know about, and maybe you don't work for a company that makes skin lotions, maybe they just work hair products, for your own career, for your own sake, learn how to make every product that you can make. There are some great, interesting formularies out, some really old ones. Harry's Cosmeticology has a whole bunch of different formulas in there. I'm going through this whole Bennett's formulary. Just learn how to put ingredients together and experiment on things and learn and embrace the notion of being a formulating chemist, and not only creating the formulas, but embrace that science, learn that science, learn about surfactants and thickeners and thixotropic systems and preservatives and how they work and why you use them. And there's just so much to learn. Oh, I could talk for hours, but I won't. That's going to bring us to the end of this IFSCC webinar, Cosmetic Science. Thank you all so much for attending. We're going to have another one of these in 2 weeks. We'll have another expert online. And if you have ideas for seminars, webinars in the future, there's topics you want to learn about, let us know. Let us know if you know some sort of experts that could be great speakers for a webinar like this. We'd love to hear that too. So thanks again for all your participation. I will get to the formulation questions that I can, and that is Perry, and I am out. Thanks, everybody. We'll be starting shortly. There we are. We're started. Hello. Hello, everyone. All right.
Whoever you are. Yeah.
Well, we don't see anybody online just yet, just you and me.
Okay.
But we're not starting for another time. Oh, it was just you and me. Now it's 42 people.
Look at that.
Hello, everybody.
We're throwing a party.
We are throwing a party. Welcome to another IFSCC webinar. This is, what is this, Marilyn? Our sixth one?
Sixth one.
Yeah, our sixth in a series. We've got a lot of people already online, 101 people already. We're going to get started in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. I am Perry Romanowski, the chair of the Education Committee. And with me, Mary Lynn. Hello, Mary Lynn. Mary Lynn
I'm doing the sticky note right now.
Gotcha. She is the executive secretary?
Secretary General.
Secretary General. She actually is the person who helps keep all of this stuff running. And if you're just joining us, wow, we're over 200 people already joining us. When you join in, take a look at the chat there. Feel free to post your name and where you're from. We got Sonia from BSAS. Is that Australia? Brisbane, Australia? I don't know. Sylvia, hello, Sylvia. We've got Maria from Argentina. Well, welcome, Maria. So good to have you.
Buenos dias.
Yeah, so we got a lot of good stuff planned today. I wanted you to take a look at what do we got here?
Argentina. Oh, Philip's from Singapore. It's late in the night in Singapore.
Singapore. Wow, we got Olga from Chile. So a lot of South America. I've never been to South America. I was going to get to go this year, but this darn virus.
To Uruguay and Chile.
Sergio from Bolivia. Hello, greetings.
Bolivia.
Magda from South Africa.
Isn't this exciting?
This is people from all over the world, and we do have people there's somebody from Boston there. Caroline from South Africa. Ooh. Nihal from Istanbul. That's I love to see everybody from around the world taking part in this, and this is live since we can say, hey, there's Papa Nut from Thailand. So we are going to. I did go to Thailand. I went to Bangkok. That is quite a city, Bangkok. That is the most unique city that I've ever been to.
Oh,
I have to say, and I've been to a few cities.
I love Bangkok. We have Lynn de Cameroon. Bonjour, bonsoir de Cameroon.
Hello, Lisa. Hello, Richard. Vicky. Hello from San Diego. We got both coasts of the United States. Sharon from Florida.
Excellent.
Gabriela from Brazil. Hello. We're going to get started in 8 minutes. Now, I want to tell you in that chat there, it's not only for saying hello, which we love to hear hello and where you're from, but it is also for asking questions or letting us know if there's technical difficulties. Sorry, sometimes there are. And a lot of that is based on the vagaries of the internet. someday we're going to have 5G and all of these internet issues will seem laughable. But until then, you might have internet issues. I just want to assure everybody, we are recording this. And so if you do happen to fall out, first you could try to refresh your site and that can get you back on. But if you don't have that, we're going to record this, and the recording hopefully is going to be right on. And if it's not, I will just re-record it so you can see the picture. I'm not below that. Luz from Mexico, hello. I hear that the president of Mexico is coming to the United States, that I heard today. He's meeting with our president, and they're having a whole shindig about signing some trade deal or something.
I thought you meant Eva Ramos, the president of the Mexican Society.
No, yes. Well, that is what.
That would be exciting too.
We got Steve from Florida. Hello, Steve. Yes, I'm doing all right. Marilyn, you doing all right? Marilyn's located in New York.
It's very hot, very steamy. A whole week of lousy weather.
Well, is steamy and hot worse than cold and frigid? Hard to say, right? We've got Jose. We've got Jose from Spain, another place that I would love to go.
Barcelona Congress 2023.
Yes. This has all got to be sorted by 2023, right?
Better be.
I'm not sure how long I can just stay in my house.
I work and I spend my entire day in the IFSCC temporary headquarters, which is one room in my 3-room apartment.
Yeah, great. We got Eliza from Denver, so now we're in the middle of the United States.
Oh, Maite just signed on. Maite's doing the next presentation.
Hello, Maite. Yeah, you could sign up for that. We're going to have registration. You can register via the IFSCC website, I believe.
Yes.
We'll send an email out about it. Florin from Mexico. We've got Clarissa from the Philippines. Robert from London. Thank you, everybody who, especially to those who have stayed up late to tune in. That's great. Hopefully you find the talk valuable. We've already got 425 people online there, Marilyn.
It's so fun to see on one screen. You've got people from Greece, the Philippines, Malaysia. Hey, Malaysia. Don't get
Malaysia.
Yeah, it's just so. India. I know you're staying up late.
India is another place that I have not been, but I would love to go there. It's very fascinating places.
Asian Society of Cosmetic Chemists will be doing their conference there in 2023. So that's your excuse.
Yes.
That's my excuse. I'm looking forward to it.
I'll get you. Jill, someone else from South Africa. Hello, Jill. Welcome. Just before we get started, we're going to get started with the official presentation in 5 minutes. But if you have a question that you want to get covered, some formulation question, we'll try to get to it. And if I don't get to it online here, be sure we'll have your email address. And so I'll be sure to answer you via email because I'm home a lot now because of the virus. And
you have nothing else to do. Is that what you're saying?
More time for email, yeah. So, yeah. So, Mary Lynn, you've been with the IFSCC for a while. How'd you get connected with the cosmetic industry?
I had no connection at all. I answered a blind ad on Indeed.org.
Oh. Was it in Braille?
No, but I had no idea what it was for. They said a part-time executive director.
Okay.
And at the time I could do a part-time job, was interested in a part-time job. And it just happened. My previous job before starting here was as a part-time executive director of the Hong Kong Society of New York City.
Oh, okay. So you've been involved in a lot of international organizations, at least in the U.S. perspective here. So.
And I just, you know me, I'm always saying I've got the best job, and I work with the nicest people.
Is it still part-time?
No, I went full-time 2 years ago.
Gotcha. Because I was going to say, it didn't seem like you worked part-time. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We're going to get started in just, what is it, 3 minutes by my clock? Is that what,
Yes,
what you
we
have there?
apologize for the mix-up on the time, Perry.
Oh, well, you were saying there was a mix-up. I don't know if there was a mix-up. I mean, I guess there was a mix-up, right? Mary Lynn called me an hour ago and she's like, "Are you ready to start?" I'm like, "Wait, it doesn't start for an hour." Of course I'm not ready. I never like to get ready until 15 minutes before. It's just my presentation style.
Ah,
It feels a little fresh, doesn't it? You never know. Hey, there's Jerry Michaels. Hello from my lovely Windy City. Welcome,
oh,
Jerry. So great to have you online. I've known Jerry for a while.
so you're in Chicago. I'm in New York. There's a 1 hour time difference.
Indeed, indeed. And then there are people
Everywhere else.
everywhere else. And we got somebody from Italy, Giuseppina. That was, that was, I think, the last trip that I made. I did the trip to Milan, which was
That's right.
October, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And since then, everything's been canceled this year that I know. Well, that's not true. New York State Suppliers Day is still on.
Still on. New York, or the National USSCC is still on. Also,
That's true. That's in early December.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So hopefully some of these shows continue to go on. Wow, we've got people from Sweden, Portugal, South Africa, Florida, Mexico, Virginia Beach, Malaysia, the UK, sunny South Africa, Argentina.
Oh, rubbing it
South-
in. Thanks a lot, John.
But South Africa right now are they like in the winter or the fall? I guess
Winter.
No,
I
it's a
don't
winter.
think it's too bad down there.
Last
like
year.
Chicago.
Oh, looks like we're like 1 minute away. We've got over 600 people on right now. So to get started here, this is kind of different since usually I'm the moderator and we've got an expert. Today, Mary Lynn's kind of the moderator, or we're kind of tag teaming. And I'm going to introduce Mary Lynn to get started. Oh, it's the top of the hour. I like to always be on time and start on time, so let's get started.